Thank you, Michael. Interwoven with that career, I've spent, I guess, probably now about 40 years involved in various ways in corrective services, and as Michael said, the last 10 years of my career as Director General in Queensland. Mick touched on a number of interesting things there in relation to the holistic response we need to the issue of drugs and other social issues that impact on our community. And it's always been a view of mine that we have too many silos in the way we go about our business, and those examples that Mick gave where the police do certain things and the courts do things and prisons do things, and then we have welfare departments who do other things, but there's no holistic response to what's happening out there in the community. And the report that Mick referred to talks about reshaping the policy parameters so we can look at these things more holistically than we do at the moment. If you look at Australia's imprisonment rates, it's quite disgraceful really compared to best outcomes in the world. The best outcomes in terms of numbers of people in prison are in the northern European countries, and sadly one of the worst examples in the whole world is in Australia in the Northern Territory, which has probably the equal highest imprisonment rate in the world. Queensland has probably, we're more than, we used to be about double Victoria. I think Victoria creeping up a bit now. Our rate is quite very bad, as is Western Australia's. And when you look at the people that come to prison, probably put them into two broad groups. There are those that are very serious offenders and really need to be in jail, and quite dangerous people. But they're not the majority of the people in jail. They're probably around a third of the prisoners. A great majority of prisoners come to jail, come for periods of less than 6 months. Some only come for a few weeks at times. Some go on remand for a couple of months and then get discharged with time served on remand as part of their sentence. And the great majority of those people sadly come from very, very unfortunate circumstances, the sort of circumstances that Mick just described in the story that he told. About 40% of our prisoners are functionally illiterate, about 12-15% are intellectually impaired, about 34% in Queensland are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, yet they're only less than 3% of the general population. About 75% have substance abuse problems, which is what comes back to the nub of what we're talking about. And many of those have carried out drug-related crimes, where they've committed crimes under the influence of drugs, or they need money to buy drugs and those sorts of things, or simple possession of drugs, and they find themselves in jail. And there's a sort of expectation, I guess, in the community that's quite unreal, that prison will deter people from committing crime, and people tend to think that if crime is being committed, people need to be punished and put in jail, and that will deter them and others from committing crime. Well, I can tell you that's complete nonsense. It's never been a deterrent. The people that come to jail, from the backgrounds I've described, their parents have quite often been in jail, friends and associates have been in jail, many of them never worked, and so they don't fear jail. It's just part of life, really. And quite often they've said to me, well, I get a feed in here and I get a bed and I'm looked after and so forth. And the sad thing is, the other thing, so it's not a deterrent. The prison is necessary, of course, for dangerous people, as I said before. You have to, if you're a danger to society, you've got to be locked up until we can do something about changing the way you behave. But it's not a deterrent. I mean, all of us in this room, we don't wake up in the morning and think, gee, I mustn't commit a crime today, I might go to jail. We don't even think about that. It's not in our whole concept, because we have got values, we've got a job, we do things, and we just live a law-abiding lifestyle. So it's not a deterrent. The other thing people expect prisons to do is to rehabilitate people, and sadly we don't do that either. When I first started working in corrections in 1974, the wisdom in those days was that the best size for a prison was about 240 beds, and in fact that was basically the size of prisons. And most prisons had a prison farm attached, and they had a low security area and sort of a high security bit, and the staff and management knew all the prisoners. And so it was a pretty good situation in the sense of actually the relationships that existed. But as the prison population grew, and then economists got hold of the whole thing and said, well look, economies of scale is what we need. And so these days prisons that are being built at the moment are built in large precincts, and they're about 1,000 to 1,500 beds, and they're massive places, and one of those cells costs just under $1 million to build. So if you build a 1,000-bed prison, it's very close to $1 billion to do that. So in Queensland at the moment, we're about 2,000 beds short. The women's prison's about 165% capacity, and all across Queensland our prisons are overcrowded. So 2,000 beds is about $2 billion to build enough beds to change all that. In the period from 2006 to 2016, that 10 years, our prison population went up by 90%. And that's all this getting tough on crime and locking people up. So not only the prison population go up, but the recidivism rate, that we're supposed to be rehabilitating people, they come in, Aboriginal people, their recidivism rate's about 75%, so within 2 years they come back to jail. White people it's about 42, 43%, so it's a massive turnover, and it's a terrible problem. So being involved in this issue, and when you look at the figure I said before, about 75% of people have got some sort of substance abuse issue, and basically within the jails we haven't got proper drug rehabilitation programs, and the ones we have got aren't really linked to what happens when they get back out again. In terms of drug rehabilitation, obviously there's a drying out period and detoxification and all of that, but then there's a whole cognitive change process needed to get people to start to change their beliefs and habits and do things differently. But sadly, they leave jail and go back to the circumstances where they came from, back to the same associates, the same fact that they haven't got a job and all of the things, they've got a stigma of a prison sentence and everything else, and it only gets worse and worse and worse. So the valuable thing that I got out of this Australia 21 was being able to sit around with colleagues and talk about these sorts of things and look at this holistic response. And I'll just close on this little description of this project that we're currently working on, and that is that we've made a focus, of my colleagues and I in Queensland, of looking at the issue of Aboriginal overrepresentation in jails, and the fact that's driven by social and economic dysfunction and in the communities that many of these people come from. But it's also driven and maintained by the fact that Aboriginal people are disempowered from dealing with the problem. So crimes are committed by Aboriginal people, they come to jail, separated from their families, kept in jail for a while and sent back. And sadly, in some of our areas of the state, particularly in the north, that's now become a rite of passage for young Aboriginal people to go to jail, and because that's what they do. So the only way you're going to break that cycle is to have some sort of holistic response where whatever happens in the jail is linked somehow to what happens in the community, and how can we strengthen the community and strengthen the families that live in those communities. So what we propose to the Queensland Government, and it's under active consideration at the moment, is a model where we build healing and rehabilitation centres instead of correctional centres, and we put those centres on traditional land across Queensland. We've mounted a pilot project with the Bidjara people, and I don't know, some of you might know Keelan Mailman. She's was Australian Mother of the Year last year, but she's chair of the Bidjara traditional owners, and they have about 200,000 acres just outside Augathella at the back of the Carnarvon Gorge, and they've also got traditional land at Augathella and in Charleville. And so we're looking at putting healing and rehabilitation facilities, 3 of them in that region, and we've talked to the Chief Magistrate and the Magistrate in charge of the Murray Court and the Deputy Chief Magistrate, and we've outlined the programs we're going to run in those facilities, and we put to them that from when we open them, if a person comes before the courts in central and western Queensland and they attract a prison sentence for whatever they've done, the offender will be given the opportunity, instead of going to prison, to actually go to one of these healing and rehabilitation centres where they will be required to reside under a probation order, and then they will go through a detoxification program if that's needed. They'll go through a cultural healing program, and then there's a range of other programs we have related to employment and education and so forth that are built into this model. We see these centres only having between about 12 and 24 people, so we can actually work intensively with individuals. And then when they leave that, instead of having a traditional probation and parole office service, we're going to have a group of mentors that will work with family and the offender. We'll have an employment agency engaged, and we're looking at trying to get these people stabilised. The beauty of this is that these centres will be owned and operated by Aboriginal people, and we staffed by Aboriginal people, so it'll create employment for a start out in those areas. But the big thing is that it empowers Aboriginal people to deal with the problems of their own people. And so In terms of response to drugs, that report talks about minimising harm. At the moment, putting people in jail increases the harm because you're separating from family, separating from community, you're not giving them any new skills to break those habits and problems, and they come back in and we get this tremendous cycle. And if we can turn that 90% increase over the decade that I mentioned into a 40 or 50% decrease, it will absolutely save mega millions for Queensland. So I might just pause there. But that's my interest in this whole thing.